All right, first of all, can we get one more round of applause for our worship team, please? But then before I get started for tonight, I have asked Noah here to pray for me. So I'm going to turn it over to him. Oh, yeah, round of applause for Noah. Come on. Noah! But yeah, I'm going to let him pray over me and over us, and then we'll get started.
All right, let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for allowing us to meet together and to give meaning to our meetings. Dear Lord, I pray that you give Brandon the power to articulate what you've laid on his heart, and I pray that you give us humility in listening to his words. And in your name I pray, amen.
Amen. Thank you. So while this is my main job here at CCBT as a campus minister, like many of us do, I wear quite a few hats. I have a couple side gigs, a few other responsibilities in my life. And one of those is during most summers, unfortunately not this summer, but most summers, I lead a week of camp, a middle school week of camp at BRCC. Go BRCC. Jack, really? Yeah, your parents run the place. I was expecting at least you. All right. Okay, doesn't care about his parents, I guess, but that's okay. But this last summer, when we were trying to figure out what our theme would be, I stumbled upon this series of Bible study books. They all had this similar kind of cadence to the titles, Sinners and Saints, Sticks and Stones, but one of them stood out to me, and it was Mountains and Valleys. And as I looked into it, what I found out is the basic idea behind the Bible study was mountains aren't just mountains in the Bible, and valleys aren't just valleys. They both have deeper meaning. And this led both that to be the theme of summer camp last year, but it also led me to kind of down this rabbit hole of, well, does every landscape feature, every bit of this biblical geography have a deeper meaning? And it does. There's this whole study of what these different landscapes, these different kind of landmarks mean throughout the Bible. This is what I've been able to find so far. Mountains are these places. They're high up. It's where heaven actually meets earth. It's where people can go and talk to and spend time with God. And then there's the valleys. These are kind of the deep, dark places. It's where conflict happens. It's where darkness lives. And then there's the wilderness and the desert. And when you see someone go out into the wilderness or the desert, they're probably about to be tested in some way. They're going to go through some sort of trial. Then there's rivers, usually relates to life or renewal. And the list goes on. There's so many ways that this shows up all throughout the biblical story. And I could go on, but the interesting part was then stepping into this semester, as I'm looking at the Psalms, I see that there's specifically 2 Psalms written by David while he was hiding in a cave. And this was a landscape that I hadn't seen represented very strongly in the Bible before, so I was interested. How does the Bible define the cave? What does the cave represent as a biblical landscape? Now these Psalms are Psalms 57 and Psalms 142. And if we look at their headings, it says in the heading of Psalm 57, we read, "For the director of music, to the tune of Do Not Destroy." Probably quite the tune. "Of David, when he fled from Saul into the cave." And then if we looked at Psalm 142, we get a similar heading. "Of David, when he was in the cave." So the hope would be that if we read both of these Psalms and connected them to the life of David, it would help us to understand what the cave in the Bible is meant to represent. But before we read those Psalms tonight, we need to know the context. We need to know where we're starting off. How did David end up in this cave? Well, Psalm 57's heading tells us a little bit about what's going on. It says he's fleeing from Saul into this cave. If we take that into context, we realize there's only really one option for where this lands in David's story, where he's fleeing from Saul and ends up in a cave. And that's 1 Samuel chapter 22. And the very first verse starts like this: "David left Gath and escaped to the cave of Adullam." So this is the midpoint in the story, the climax, the turning point. David has ended up in the cave. We don't really understand quite what's happening before this other than he's running from Saul, and we don't know how this is going to turn out afterwards. We're right there in the middle. And we're first going to go back and look at how did he end up here before we see what this does for him in his life. But just in case you need a visual for kind of really how deep and dark this is about to get for David, I thought of this scene today that I wanted to show you guys. So if you'll look up at the TVs for us.
any human being. The guy was an emperor. A rich, powerful ball of charisma. Oh, yeah. This is his story. Well, actually my story. That's right. I'm that llama. The name is Kuzco. Emperor Kuzco. I was the world's nicest guy, and they ruined my life for no reason. Oh, is that hard to believe? Look, I tell you what, you go back a ways, you know, before I was a llama, and this will all make sense.
So that's where David is in this moment. That's David, right there. The man that would be king, now in a deep, dark place, maybe not out in the rain, but at least in a cave. He's gone through some stuff, and now we're going to go back and look at how did this happen? How did that happen? So to do that, we need to go back and look at really at the start of David's story. And we're going to fly through this pretty quick, so don't worry, I'm not going to go through like 17 chapters of David's story here in 1 Samuel. But he first pops up in 1 Samuel 16. And this is when Samuel comes to David and anoints him to be the future king of Israel. And if the book of Samuel was a movie, what we're about to experience is the movie montage. The upbeat one where the guy trains, this is Rocky running up the stairs, doing all these things. This is his rise to fame and fortune. Chapter 17, he fights Goliath and starts to gain notoriety, it's a hard word, notoriety amongst the people. He is praised by pretty much everybody around him, and his family is shocked by this act that he was able to do. And as the chapters go on, he gains a best friend in this guy named Jonathan, who's actually the son of Saul, the current king. He even gets married to a woman named Michal, who is also the daughter of King Saul. All this is going to come back to bite him, but anyways, he goes on to become what was a shepherd boy out in the field. To the right hand of the king, he becomes in charge. He's the commander of the army of the king. The people are literally in the streets singing songs about how great he is, saying he has slain so many, and actually kind of down-talking Saul, which, again, this is going to come back to bite him. And this is the moment of the record scratch. He's got a best friend, he's got a wife, he's got the best job, everything is going right, and Saul does not like that. Saul has had enough. He sees where this is heading, that if David keeps going down this road, if he keeps gaining enough favor with the people, they're going to want to put him on the throne. And this is when he snaps. It says in chapter 19 that while David was playing the lyre, Saul tried to pin him to the wall with a spear, but David eluded him as Saul drove the spear into the wall. That night, David made good his escape. This is the start of David on the run. This marks the beginning of a downward spiral for David for the next few chapters of his life. First, David runs home. Great place to start. Go back home to your wife. But she says, hey, if you stick around here, Saul's men are going to come and kill you. You got to go. And she even buys him some time, makes a fake, does the classic pillow under the sheet in the bed, and they believe it for a little while, so he's able to get away. But from there, he has to run, and he seeks safety with his mentor, Samuel. He thinks maybe he can protect me, but he gets ratted out. And he realizes he has to run yet again. Samuel cannot protect him in this moment. And then he's like, oh, perfect, Jonathan. The son of the king, my best friend. If anybody can convince Saul to stop pursuing me, it's him. Jonathan can do it. But at first, Jonathan doesn't even believe him. And by the time that Jonathan finally believes that his father, Saul, is trying to kill David, it's too late. And David has to run yet again. Finally, pretty desperate, not finally, one more, he has to go and talk to the priests. He thinks, okay, Saul can't mess with the priests. I'm safe here. Kind of like religious sanctuary. I can go live with the priests. But again, there's a mole in the priesthood, and it rats him out, and he has to run once more. Now, finally, he goes to the last possible person you would want to go to, his most bitter, greatest enemy, the Philistines. And he has to, just to have the chance at getting them to protect him, he has to act crazy. He has to act totally wacko, just to hope that they don't recognize who he is and they're willing to give him some form of sanctuary. But even that does not work. And if all of that just on the surface, all of the running, all of the getting turned away, isn't bad enough, during this time, while David is on the run, he will lose his home, his wife will marry another man, Samuel, his mentor, will die. He will never see him again. Jonathan, he will see one more time before he dies in battle. The priests who sheltered him, they all get killed by Saul. And he has made a fool of himself in front of the people that he's supposed to wipe out, his greatest enemy. He now looks completely foolish. This is what led to that moment. This is how David ended up in the cave. This is what he's been through the last few days, weeks of his life. These are the thoughts, the memories going through his head as we read that first sentence. David left Gath, the place of his enemy, and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So now we're all caught up. We know how we got here, how David got here, and what he's been through these last few days or weeks. It's a lot. It's heavy. And now we can read the Psalms. Now we understand where he's coming from when he's about to cry out to God with these two prayers. We have to stop and ask ourselves before we jump in. How will this future king handle this crisis? How will David navigate this time in the cave? And what will we find out this cave is meant to represent? And how will God use it to prepare him for what's next? We're actually going to start with Psalm 142. Because as I've looked at these Psalms, I have a belief that even though it comes later in the book, this was the first prayer, the first psalm that David wrote while he was in the cave. I'll explain why in just a minute, but let's go ahead and read through it together. It should show up on the screen. I cry aloud to the Lord. I lift up my voice to the Lord for mercy. I pour out before him my complaint. Before him I tell my trouble. When my spirit grows faint within me, it is to you who watch over my path. In the path where I walk, people have hidden a snare for me. Look and see, there is no one at my right hand. No one is concerned for me. I have no refuge. No one cares for my life. I cry to you, Lord. I say, you are my refuge, my portion in the land of the living. Listen to my cry, for I am in desperate need. Rescue me from those who pursue me, for they are too strong for me. Set me free from my prison, that I may praise your name. Then the righteous will gather around me because of your goodness to me. We already knew this, but David ain't doing so hot right now. Listen to some of the phrases he uses. I cry aloud. I pour out before him my complaint. My spirit grows faint. He is feeling the weight of everything that he has lost. He's telling God that people are after him. They want to kill him. They are setting traps for him, and he has nowhere to go and no one to help him. But what I want to focus in on in this psalm is actually two phrases that he uses. And what I think this does is this tells us actually David's mindset about what the cave might have meant, maybe what he thought it would mean when he went into it. The first one is this. He says the land of the living, which if you have a land of the living, you can assume there's a land of the dead, the opposite. And he asks God to set him free from prison. And I think he uses these very strategically because this is the vision of the cave that he had walking in. This is what he thought was going to be his destiny. This is where he thought he was heading. You see, in this time period, if you had the means, if you had the money, you would want your family to have a cave that you would use as the family tomb. If you go all the way back to Genesis, as early as you can get with caves, Abraham and most of his family are all buried in the same cave. You even see some of his descendants go out of their way, pleading as they're on their deathbed, make sure that I can go back and be buried with my ancestors, with my father's family. They want to be buried together, and this cave was supposed to be the tomb where they all went, the cave of their family. And the only other big story that he might have been calling upon is in the book of Joshua. And there, when the caves are mentioned, it's in reference to a story where Joshua actually imprisons 5 enemy kings in a cave. They ran there to hide, and he rolls a stone in front of the cave and traps them in there. He leaves them in this prison, defeats their armies, and then releases them only to sentence them to death. So as David had entered the cave, and when he's singing this first prayer to God, when he's crying out to him, this is probably where his mind goes. That at the lowest point of his life thus far, with nowhere else to go, these are the stories. And based on his history, when he entered this place, he assumed he was going to death and imprisonment, probably in the reverse order. He could assume that the cave would be a jail, that he would be stuck there, locked in the cave until Saul arrived to kill him. But we know that's not David's story. That something changes between Psalm 142 and 57. Something happens. Something in David is going to change, and it's going to change not just him, but the perception of this biblical landscape. of what a cave is. It will change the definition of the cave itself. So now let's look at Psalm 57. David cries out to God again, "Have mercy on me, my God. Have mercy on me. For in you I take refuge. I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings until the disaster has passed. I cry out to you, God Most High, to God who vindicates me. He sends from heaven and saves me, rebuking those who hotly pursue me. God sends forth his love and his faithfulness. I am in the midst of lions. I am forced to dwell among ravenous beasts, men whose teeth are spears and arrows, whose tongues are sharp swords. Be exalted, O God. Above the heavens, let your glory be all over the earth. They spread a net at my feet. I was bowed down in distress. They dug a pit in my path, but they have fallen into it themselves. My heart, O God, is steadfast. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and make music. Awake, my soul. Awake, harp and lyre. I will awaken the dawn. I will praise you, Lord, among the nations. I will sing of you among the peoples. For great is your love, reaching to the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches the skies. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be all the earth, be over all the earth. So what's different in this psalm? What has changed in David's language? Well, first off, he's a lot more hopeful and a lot more honest. Now see, there's a fair amount of honesty in the first psalm, but there's not a lot of hope. You see, in Psalm 57, it weaves the two together throughout the whole psalm. He doesn't just want God to save him, he knows God will save him. He says, he sends from heaven and saves me. He says, God sends forth his love and faithfulness. He says, my heart, O God, is steadfast. My heart is steadfast. I will sing and make music. Awake my soul. He's still honest. He's still talking about how people are after him, how he's threatened by them, how he's even scared of them. He's honest about how bad the situation really is. But in this second psalm, there's an expectation. He truly believes, there's a confidence that God will show up, that he will be there and protect him from his enemy. And second, David fully embraces the idea of taking refuge. He now really understands what he means when he says that. You see, he says it very plainly in the first psalm, Lord, you are my refuge, just once. But in the second psalm, he says, I will take refuge in the shadow of your wings. And that's not to say that God has wings, but it's to say, imagine, you're a little baby bird, just hatched out of the egg. You're cold, you're scared, you don't know what's going on, and you nestle in the wing of your mother for warmth, for protection. He is taking refuge with God not because he has no other plan, not because this is the backup, not because he thinks it might be the best option. He is there because he knows he needs to be there, that it is the best place for him, that it is where he is called to be. God just is not a shelter from the rain. He is a warm embrace. And I think David learned these lessons. He learned to be truly honest while still remaining hopeful, and to take refuge in God like a little baby bird. And then God gave David what he asked for. He gave David a gathering place and a stronghold. Let me explain what I mean by that. See, in our first psalm, Psalm 142, David for a moment taps into the core of his problem, what he actually needs. I don't even know if he did so intentionally, but in the very middle of the psalm, the middle verse, it says this, look and see, there is no one at my right hand, no one is concerned for me. I have no refuge, no one cares for my life. See, when David boils it all down, his entire situation, when he considers how he ended up here, it's because he had no people caring for him. He had lost them all. They had had to send him away to escape. And he had nowhere to take refuge. There had been nowhere that was safe for him other than where he is right now. No people and no refuge. But then he enters the cave. He cries out once and he cries out twice. And that second time he has learned a hopeful honesty. He has learned to take refuge in God, but David still needed two things. He needed people and he needed refuge. He needed people to surround him, a community, and he needed a physical place. God was his refuge in a spiritual sense, but he needed a physical place that would protect him from attack from the enemy. And that is what God gifts him after that second psalm. You see, if we read a little bit more of 1 Samuel 22, it goes on to say, when his brothers and his father's household heard about it, they went down to him there. And all those who were in distress, in debt, or discontent gathered around him, and he became their commander. About 400 men were with him there. And a few verses later, it goes on to say, but the prophet Gad said to David, do not stay in the stronghold. Go into the land of Judah. So David left and went to the forest of Hereth. You see, first, God makes this cave a gathering place. Yes, his family, his brothers, they come down to see him, but then he sends them this interesting group of people. He sends them those that are in distress, those that are in debt, and those that are discontent. An interesting choice on God's part, maybe, but also think about it. Who at this point of time could understand where David is more than them? To be in distress, he's on the run from his enemy. To be in debt, he has nothing. And to be discontent, I don't think I'd be happy sitting in that cave right now. These are the people that will understand him the best, and it's the people that he's going to need moving forward. So God sends them to this cave, and it becomes a gathering place, not just for these people in this moment now, but it will continue to be a gathering place in the future, and we'll come back to that. And here's the interesting thing. I actually, in a way, experienced this a little bit this week. Some of you may have seen the message that I sent out over the GroupMe. First of all, everything's good. We're all good. No worries. But yes, like probably a lot of you have experienced, or a lot of the surrounding Virginia area has experienced, there's been some flooding recently. And I had the fun experience of, what's that weird noise? And stepping down into my basement. And the last step was a splash. Not a good sign. So my basement had flooded pretty bad. And to be honest, in the moment, I freaked out. I had no idea what to do. I was literally running around with my hands on my head, screaming. Brittany had no idea what was going on. She was upstairs and eventually wandered down. Totally level-headed. I'm still freaking out the whole time. But as I start to get into the process of trying to get this water out of my basement, I have Brittany send that message out to the group chat. No idea what's going to happen from there. I open the side door and I just start shoveling water as best as I can. I don't know how long I went for. I'll tell you, I was exhausted. My back still hurts, no joke. But as I'm standing there in the doorway, pushing this water out of the basement of this house that I bought less than a year ago, person after person after person after person rolls up to my house. There wasn't even enough room on the street to park. I was worried they were going to get stuck in my very muddy yard. I had so much help, we didn't even need it all. Like, there was almost too many people there. But first of all, let me stop and just say, for any of you that helped or wanted to help and just couldn't be there, or just read the message and prayed for us, thank you so much. But it was incredible to watch that even in this time when it wasn't an emergency, it wasn't that crazy, we didn't lose anything that was dear to us. We were so lucky in that respect. It was a lot of wet boxes and old, like, renovation equipment. It wasn't that big of a deal. But man, the way that you all showed up was incredible. And if David felt even just a little bit of that, as those people rolled into his cave in his time of need, when he had lost everything, I lost almost nothing. He lost everything. If he felt some of that heart as they rolled into that cave, man, he was lucky. Those people, even though we read those sentences and think the distressed, the deaded, the discontent, why would you want them? No, that's who you want. They'll get you in that time. They'll understand you when you're in the cave. That's the place and the people that you want to be in that time. But that's not all that God did. He gathered those people in that cave. He gave them to David to support him in that time of need, but he also made that cave a stronghold. See, David's actually, it seems like, the first person to call God their stronghold or their first fortress. He's the first one, I think. And I know this for sure, he is the one that uses that phrase the most. It is all throughout the Psalms of David. This experience, this cave experience, is the reason that David uses that phrase so often. It was his name for God. It was how he knew and had experienced and understood who God was. He was his fortress, his stronghold in his time of need. And this remained true for all of David's life. See, if you look towards the end, almost right at the end, 2 Samuel 23, 13 and 14, it says this, during the harvest time, 3 of the 30 chief men came down to David at the cave of Adullam, while a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim. At the time, David was in the stronghold, and the Philistine garrison was at Bethlehem. Even at the very end of his life, he's an old, experienced king. He's been through so much. He's back at the exact same cave. Why? But we also see the exact same thing happening. People gather around him. These are some of his mighty men, maybe even some of the same people that gathered around him that first time at the other cave. Now they're gathering around him again. And they're back. They're calling it a stronghold. They're calling this cave a stronghold. It was this place that they had learned through their experience from that time was a place that they could retreat to, that they could take refuge in, that they knew when they had lost all the ground, this would be the place they knew they could hold. It was their stronghold, not just David's, but all of theirs. It was a place they knew they could take refuge in. This cave, this place, it had become so much. It went from a cave for a runaway to a castle for a king. It was a place of death and chains, and now it was a place to gather and regroup. And after this experience, the cave in the Bible is never the same. It's not a tomb. It's not a prison anymore. It is changed forever in the biblical narrative. Elijah would take refuge in a cave. He would see all these things: fire, wind, earthquakes. None of it held God's voice. You know what held God's voice? The gentle whisper in the cave. And when Jesus died and went into a cave that was called and meant to be a tomb, it did not hold him. And he too emerged from that cave a king. That's what the cave does now. No more is it a tomb or a prison. It cannot hold us anymore. It is a place of transformation. It is a place of transformation, a place to gather people around you in your time of need. It is a stronghold when you need it the most. And here's the thing, everyone goes through the cave. It is, as we're found out tonight, a metaphor. At some point, you will be there. You will be tested. You will lose a lot. You won't know where to go other than the arms of God. There's no real way around it. It's going to happen. The question is, how will you navigate through the cave? Here's the two things I hope you can do. The things that changed David's heart. He was hopefully honest. See, the cave strips everything away. The root word for cave revolves around the idea of being exposed, of uncovering, of pouring out, of being emptied. That process, while it can be painful, it's easier when you're honest. It's easier when you're honest with God about how you're feeling. He can take it. He wants to hear it. He's the one that you probably don't need to tell, but wants to hear it the most. And to be honest with those around you about what you're going through. See, if David wasn't honest, those people that God gathered around him wouldn't have been as much. They wouldn't have been able to connect on what they were going through at the time. They wouldn't have known that they were all discontent. They wouldn't have known that they were all in debt. They wouldn't have known that they were all in distress. And the same goes for each of us. If we don't tell each other what we're going through, I won't know looking at you if you're going through the cave always. Sometimes you got to tell me. But when you do, when you're hopefully honest, when you retain hope while still telling people what's going on, that's when someone can step into your story. That's when God can become your refuge, and when people can become around you as a gathering place, all the while keeping hope in God. And second and last is don't hide. Take refuge. See, when you hide from your enemies, when you hide from your struggles, it gives them more power. And it gives nothing to God. But to seek first refuge in the Lord, to go to him first before you try to hide, before you go anywhere else, to seek the Lord, to seek his refuge first, to embrace him like you would a parent, to embrace him like a little baby bird under his wing. That's when God gives you power. That's when God becomes your stronghold. That's when he can do amazing things for you. That's how he helps you get through the cave. So please remain hopefully honest for whatever you're going through. Sometimes you're going to lose a little. It's going to be some cardboard boxes in your basement. Other times you're going to lose a lot. But please, let the cave be a gathering place. Let whoever it is, us or someone else, gather around you, and let God be your stronghold. Let's pray. God, I thank you for this opportunity to share your word. I pray that if someone, even just one person, is feeling kind of like David tonight, that it just feels like every time they go somewhere, they're turned away. It just feels like every time they look around, they lose something else. Let them know they're not alone. That the cave can be a gathering place. That if they're hopefully honest, if they're honest with you and honest with those around you, you will gather people around them who can care for them, who will understand what they're going through, who can love them well, and that you will be their refuge, Lord. That you will be their stronghold, their place to retreat to, their place to feel safe in again. That you would be that for David, that you would be that for everyone who came after him, and that you would be that for us. We pray all that in your son's